What's good, everybody? Take KZ back here. I wanted to do another NBA video. A topic that's been going around with All Star Weekend. We had the All Star Weekend discussion, we have expansion discussion, and we have like a tanking discussion. Um, Being an accountant, I like kind of playing with the numbers. So I want to go through a couple of these scenarios, kind of my thoughts, kind of some of the ideas I had, just on like the one in a gazillion chance that Adam Silver or anyone in the NBA sees it. Because I do think my ideas are better than the ones floated around. I'm not super fond of the anti-tanking ideas that have been floating around. So let's jump through this, and then we'll end with the draft lottery odds. So first thing I wanted to talk about was expansion. One of the big things with expansion, outside of the money that teams are giving up, because instead of getting 1/30th of the pie, you get 1/32nd of the pie, um, that you essentially never get back. So the main issue with that is that, no matter how much of the expansion fee they pay, you're going to lose that money over time. But it does sound like expansion is probably going to happen. So I wanted to kind of look at. So if we look at the current format here, the column most on the left, I put this together just so we can kind of look at the number of games, because the big thing, with injuries and tanking and everything is the injuries. Um, a lot of people think the games need to reduce, which I agree with, but that you lose revenue with that. So I kind of played around with the idea of expanding expanding the season in some ways. So you try to get the best of both worlds. You shorten the season, but you also, don't lose that revenue. So the current format, we got 30 teams, 15 per conference. You have six divisions with five teams in each division. The divisions don't really matter in the NBA, but I don't see them going away because they are kind of a useful scheduling tool. So you play your opposite conference twice a year, home and away. That's 30 games of the total season. You play every team in your conference that's not in your division three times, so that's another 30 games, so we're up to 60. And you play four games against your division, which is 16, gets us to 76 games. And there's not a real clean way to balance the schedule. I'm not enough of an NBA historian to know why we play 82 games, but we've expanded up to 30 teams over time. The 90s, we had something like 6 to 8 expansion teams, and then the Bobcats got us to an even 30 in 2004, I believe. Maybe it was 02. So it probably had something more to do with the schedule when there were 20 teams or 21 teams or whatever. Um, but we landed needing six random games, which you end up playing the same teams in your conference. So you randomly play six teams that aren't in your division four times. And that's not necessarily all the same conference now because they've added the midseason tournament. I guess that is all because you don't play the other conference until the final. So yeah, so you play six random games, um, two of which are determined by the NBA Cup, and then four are just completely random, which gives you a grand total in the season for the NBA 1,230 regular season games. They've added the play-in, which is the 7-8 game, the 9-10 game, and then the loser of the 7-8 versus the winner of the 9-10 to determine the 8 seed. So that's six games because you play that in both conferences. And then the NBA Cup final is an additional game. Every NBA Cup game counts as a regular season game except the final. So grand total, you get 1,237 games on the season. So my idea to change this to shorten the season, but not necessarily shorten the games played so you can still get that revenue, is if you chop it down to 80 games, you get to, I need to keep track of my math here. So you keep the same schedule except you reduce the random games down from 6 to 4, which you lose 30 regular season games in total by doing that. But what I did was I removed the NBA Cup from in season tournament to a completely outside tournament, kind of mirroring like European soccer, like the FA Cup in England is probably the cleanest example, but every country does this. Even in the US, we have the US Open Cup, which is outside the MLS season. But you play this completely outside of the regular season, so it's an additional 29 games. So we're losing 30 games regular season, but we're replacing that with 29 games. It's actually 28 because I'm including the NBA Cup Final, which I've removed. If you look, you can see the zeros in playing games and NBA Cup Final. And I did a line underneath that to explain where my changes are. So the NBA Cup tournament outside the regular season would be 29 total games, and I'm going to expand the play-in to be 6 seeds. So the 7 and 8 will no longer play each other. What will happen is the 9 and 12 will play each other. So 1 through 6 is an automatic bid for the playoffs. 7, 8 is a play-in. We're going to keep the 7, 8 seeds play-ins, but instead of it being 7, 8, 9, 10, we're going to add 11 and 12 to that. So 9 will play 12 and 10 will play 11 in the first round. Those 2 winners will go on to play 7 and 8. Am I doing this right? So let's see. I think I did my math wrong on this again. I proposed this a couple days ago to Discord. So 9 plays 12, 10 plays 11. That's 4 games. And then 7 plays the winner of 9. 7 plays the winner of 10, 11. 8 plays the winner of 9, 12. So that's another 4 games. So that would be 8, not 10. Let's just change these real fast, just so we have those numbers accurate. So you would increase 2 play-in games. So doing this would keep the regular season games completely the same, or the total games before the playoffs completely the same. You eliminate 30 regular season games, but you add 28 NBA Cup games, and you add 2 play-in games. So the schedule stays exactly the same, but certain teams get a reduced schedule. Certain teams do have an increased schedule, which is the case with the play-in teams. So, for example, if you play in both rounds of the play-in, you're playing 84 games in the season. If you happen to make the NBA Cup Final as well, that would be 85 total games. So, in this scenario, there would be 5 rounds in the NBA Cup, and then 2 rounds in the play-in. So you could play up to 87. So for certain teams, the maximum games played would increase, but we're cutting the regular season down to 80. Everyone has to play at least 1 cup game. So we're only chopping 1 game off the season. Everyone's going to play at least 81. You can play up to 87. So it's not really reducing the season, but we're moving in that direction. The main reason I wanted to take the cup out of the regular season is I think this is how you fix the All-Star game, is you move the NBA Cup to All-Star weekend. So I don't have a chart for this, so you're going to just have to follow along with me. Hopefully I can explain it well enough. The idea is essentially you take the whole month of February off, and we're going to play the NBA Cup. So all these games will be nationally broadcast. Essentially what you would probably do is you would do 4 games a day on national TV, which gets a little tricky, but you stagger them. So you probably would give Amazon, ESPN, and NBC 1 game each, and then they would kind of alternate the days that the stations get the 4th game. So Monday ESPN would get 2 games, Tuesday Amazon would get 2 games, Wednesday NBC would get 2 games, so on and so forth like that. Until you get to the final 4, and then we're going to play the semifinals and the finals during All-Star weekend. So we're essentially increasing the All-Star break to be, it wouldn't be a full month, but let's call it 3 weeks. So the All-Star break is increasing from 1 week to 3 weeks, but there is this scenario where you might end up playing the whole time. And then we're gonna kind of evaporate all the All-Star events. So we're gonna expand it out the All-Star weekend from Friday to Sunday to Thursday to Sunday. So it's gonna be 4 days instead of 3. Thursday we're gonna play 1 semifinal, and we're gonna do essentially a Super Bowl halftime show, but with a All-Star Saturday game. So we're talking like the skills competition. They did like you do the 3-point shootout, the dunk contest, and then they kind of mix around the other games. Nothing really ever sticks. So whatever idea you want to do there, probably are two new concepts we're gonna do on that semifinal Thursday. Or no, sorry. This is how I had it planned out. I didn't write this down either. Thursday, you're going to do one semifinal. You're going to do one event as the halftime show. Friday, you're going to do the same thing. The halftime show will be one of the All-Star Saturday events, and you have the second semifinal. Saturday, you're going to kind of squeeze in all the All-Star stuff. So we're going to do both the Rising Stars game and the All-Star game. And you can keep the celeb game and condense it down to be like a halftime of the Rising Stars, or right now they're doing the round robin thing with the Rising Stars and the All-Star game. So what you could do is you could do the first Rising Stars game, quarter one of the celeb game, second All-Star game, quarter two of the celeb game, and just kind of make it a long event like that. And then when you play the All-Star game, whether they change it back to East versus West or what have you, or they keep the same kind of format where there's the three teams, the two U.S. teams and the world team, you would do the dunk contest as essentially the halftime show of that. And then Sunday, you would have the NBA Cup final, and the halftime show for that would be the 3-point contest. And you could maybe change those events around if you're going to do like the Caitlin Clark versus Steph Curry thing, because that might be a bigger event. But maybe you'd still want to do that Saturday for the All-Star game. But regardless, you're kind of chopping up All-Star Saturday to be across all four events as essentially the halftime act. And then what we will do here is the four teams that make All-Star Weekend in the NBA Cup, any of those teams that have All-Stars would just get subbed out of the All-Star game. So they would become, they would get alternates selected in those cases. And then I would also change the NBA Cup to put some real stakes on it, and not just for money. I like the idea of just doing all the ideas all together, which is draft compensation, giving the player some money, and then also guaranteeing some form of a playoff spot. So I like the idea of you could be guaranteed the 7th seed in your conference, which means no matter your record, you're the top seed of the play-in tournament, which gives you an extra home game, essentially a playoff game. I like the idea of giving this team a draft pick. So we're going to increase the first round, and it's going to be the first pick outside the lottery. So under the current 30-team model, that would be pick 15. Under the 16-team model, that would be pick 17. And then when we get to my draft lottery odds, I expanded the draft lottery. So in that case, it would be pick 21. I would also give the losing team the last pick in the first round. So we're going to expand the first round from 30 picks to 32, or from 32 to 34. So the winning team, so just to use 32 teams as an example, let's stick with 30 because we're on 30. The winning team would get pick 15. The losing team would get pick 32. And the other major change we're going to do is we're going to make the trade deadline the week after All-Star break. So the main wrinkle here, and why the players would care about this draft pick, is now that draft pick is immediately tradable. So I'm going to use the Timberwolves as an example just because that's my team. So that's the team I'm most familiar with. The Timberwolves trade deadline, what they did was they salary dumped Mike Conley this year to get them under the first apron, which allowed them more flexibility to sign buyout guys. It unfreezes their pick so they could trade their 2033 in the offseason. And how they did that was they did a pick swap with Detroit. Detroit's looking like they're going to be the 29 or 30th pick in the draft this year. Minnesota's going to be something like 22, 23. So they swapped those picks, essentially moving down 6 spots. The reason they did that pick swap is they have no tradable firsts, and then they also traded for Ayo Dosunmu, which cost them 4 second-round picks. So in this scenario, if the Timberwolves had won the the NBA Cup, they would now have the 15th pick to trade, which means they could not only trade the 15th pick, but that would also unlock their pick, which is projected to be pick 23, that they could trade outright instead of as a swap. So, for instance, in both these trades, they involved Chicago. Mike Conley went to Chicago, and then in a separate trade, they traded with Chicago to get Ayo Dosunmu. So instead of doing that swap with Detroit, they could have done something like trade 23 straight to the Bulls and have the Bulls kick back something to Detroit to give Detroit the sweetener. They could have traded the 15th pick to Detroit and then gotten sweeteners back from Detroit and Chicago, something like that, because Chicago got Jaden Ivey, which was their prize for the trade, and they kind of took on Mike Conley's contract as their price to pay to get Jaden Ivey. And so what that would allow the Timberwolves to do is they would have been able to keep their 4 seconds instead of having to package all their tradable seconds as well, essentially having no tradable picks. By unlocking that 15th pick by winning the NBA Cup, or even the 32nd pick had they made the finals and lost, that gives them a lot more trade flexibility for that week at the trade deadline, which players might not fully understand, but I think they would at least grasp that it makes the team better immediately because you can trade that pick. And then you would still, I would say you probably just do $1 million to the players each. So each player gets $1 million if you win the cup. That's a decent incentive. And then you get that play-in spot locked in as well. All right. So going back to the total games. So if we keep the current format and expand to 32 teams, this would make it 16 teams per conference. I think they're going to do the 4-team divisions, which would be 8 divisions. So 4 divisions per conference. If you keep 82 games, 2 games against the other conference bumps up to 32 games because you're adding the team on the other conference. 3 games against the same conference, different division, bumps up to 36 because you're not only expanding the conference, but you're shrinking the divisions, which makes 12 teams in your conference that aren't in your division. 4 games against your division shrinks from 16 to 12. So we're adding the 2 net games there. So then to get to 82 games, you would have 2 random games. This bumps the regular season from 12-30 to 13-12. By adding those 2 teams, you get the additional 82 games total on the schedule. So we're looking at an increase in TV rights by increasing 82 games in general. So I think this gives us flexibility to shorten the schedule. So again, my first change idea is you just shrink the games down to 80. You keep the same play-in tournament with a slight tweak. So the original play-in tournament, the way I had it formatted, is a single elimination tournament. But because you have 30 teams, it's not a perfect bracket. So I gave when the cup starts, whoever the number 1 seed in the West and the number 1 seed in the East is, they get a first round bye. So you have 14 games in the first round instead of 16. And then they would just plug in against the lowest seed in round 2, and you'd go from there. With expansion, you have a perfect bracket. 32 teams equally gets you to a perfect bracket. 32 to 16 to 8 to 4 to 2 to 1. You can't do that with 30. So you get to add those 2 teams back into the first round, which gets you an extra 2 games. So you go from 29 to 31. And the play-in tournament stays the same. So under the expansion change idea, we accomplish the same thing where you get the exact number of 13-19 total games. Regular season reduces by 2, which slightly lowers the wear and tear, but not dramatically. So then I also made an alternate expansion idea where we flip the divisions. Instead of doing 8 divisions of 4, you do 4 divisions of 8. So you still have 32 games against the other conference, but you're 3, and then we are going to make it just 3 games against your conference altogether, because doing 4 against your division is going to make it too many games. So 3 games against all 15 teams in your conference is 45 games, which gets us a total to 77 regular season games. So we're cutting 5 games out of the regular season. We go from 1,280 regular season games with expansion all the way down to 1,232. So we're reducing 48 games from the schedule in total, and we're only putting back 39 with the NBA Cup and the expanded playoffs, which makes it total games of 1,271. But that is still higher than the current model of 1,237. So that's the benefit of making this change with expansion, is you're still adding 34 games in total, even if you're not. I just completely lost my train of thought. Even if you're reducing the number of games in total, the total games is still increasing. And you could even do that if let's go to their current model, 6-1, 0-0. Even if they keep the current model and just make it a 77 regular season game, you would still add 2 games to the calendar with the expansion. So I think that's one of the major benefits of expansion, is it allows you to reduce the schedule without reducing the total number of games, which should help with the injury problem. All right, so that covers that. So then the other thing I want to talk about is tanking. And I think the best way to talk about tanking is just looking at the draft model. There's been a lot of theories floated around with how to fix tanking. The suggestion I like the most is penalizing the draft odds for a team. Like Utah got fined $500,000, and Indiana I think got fined $100,000 for resting players and tanking pretty egregiously. But I think if you find them like 1% in the odds or something, that would be more effective. But my idea, again, going back to European soccer and the Premier League as an example, although all of European soccer does this, is treating the draft lottery kind of like how you treat relegation, meaning you don't reward the worst teams, you reward the best teams. So if we look at the current odds here, if you have the worst record, the worst 3 teams have a 14% chance of getting the first round pick or the number 1 overall pick. You draw up to the first 4 teams. So if you have the worst record, you have a less than 50% chance of dropping all the way out of the lottery to 5. You can't fall farther than 5. And as you get better, your odds decrease, right? So you go from 14 to 12.5 to 10.5, 9, 7.5, so on, which incentivizes teams to lose, because if you finish as the 7th worst team instead of the 8th worst team, you get 1.5% better chances of getting the first pick, right? So this is why we have the big issue with tanking. The other big issue with tanking right now is because teams trade protected picks. So you trade like a top 6 protected pick that incentivizes you to be in the top 6 of the worst records, so you can keep your pick. So the one idea floating around that I don't like is restricting the trades, making it so you can't protect picks, or you can only protect top 4 or the whole lottery and so forth. I just think restricting trades is a bad idea, especially with the aprons, which already kind of restrict trades. We saw a lot of movement at the trade deadline, but I think even though the volume of trades increased, there is still a restriction that prevents, what you can really do. Like, for example, I think if there weren't the apron restrictions, Giannis probably would have been traded at the deadline. Whether that's better or worse for the NBA is debatable, but it makes it hard to make seismic trades in the regular season. We didn't see too many seismic trades. We did see big star players traded, like Trae Young, Anthony Davis, Jaren Jackson, and Zubac to a lesser extent. Not necessarily stars, but big-time players. But none of those trades affect this season, because it's too hard to make that kind of trade in season now. You have to kind of gut your whole team. So a team like Minnesota couldn't get Giannis, even though technically there was a path to do so, but it would require trading so many players that you're gutting your team in February with the playoffs starting at the end of April. So there's just not enough time to make chemistry. So if you're really going for the title, you can't trade for Giannis, even though on paper you should want to do that upgrade. But the restrictions just make it too difficult. So I don't like the idea of restricting the protections on picks you can trade. Is the moral of that story. I kind of got off base there a little bit, but I don't want to make changes in season really to put a band-aid on this problem. I don't think it solves it. So my idea, going back to the relegation, was just rewarding winning teams. So I couldn't quite figure out how to actually make the odds for this. So this is napkin math and kind of just making up numbers that look relatively correct. I basically just flipped the numbers from the current model here. So what I did is I did the reverse order, essentially. So you're rewarded for winning, even if you don't make the playoffs. So I should have altered these slightly to make it the top four have the same odds. I just completely reversed it. But in theory, the way I would do this is I would make the four teams that lose in the play-in have identical odds. So let's just kind of ignore that there is a slight difference. So what this essentially means is if you're the worst team in the league, you're picking fifth. You do have a chance of being in the top four, but really you're restricted to picking fifth. I didn't fix this obviously because I should have flipped this. Should have noticed that before I went live. I did this on one of the lower graphs, but 5 should be 3.28 and 6 should be 92.88. So the second worst record, you're most likely picking sixth. Third record, you're most likely picking seventh. Again, these all should be flipped. So I apologize for that. But you still have a bit of a crapshoot here if you are the play-in teams. So there's not necessarily a full incentive to lose in the play-in, although you do have an incentive. So like if you're the team with the best record that loses in the play-in, you have a 47.88% chance of still picking 14th. So you basically have a coin flip of picking in the lottery or picking 14th. So you really have to weigh the risk of it. Are you better off being the 7 seed and trying your luck in the playoffs? Or do you want to just kind of punt on the season for the chance to pick number 1 overall? So this could potentially really hurt the play-in tournament, but it would hurt the play-in tournament rather than the last 2 months of the regular season, which I do think is the lesser of two evils. So again, if we move to expansion, I didn't have a official chart to copy for expansion. So again, all these numbers from here on out are kind of rough napkin math. They should look a little better than the last one because I checked these instead of just copy and pasting the other graph in the reverse order. So you would add 2 teams to the lottery here. Same kind of thing. I think this would almost incentivize tanking more because it gets more drastic the lower you get here. And so you really want to be in like a top 5, top 6. So I think if they do expansion, keeping the current model would only make tanking worse. So one thing I liked that I was playing around with is how do you incentivize no one tank even in the play-in? And so I expanded this all the way to the top or the bottom 20 teams, meaning that it would include the 7 and 8 seeds in the playoffs. So if you're the 7 seed in each conference, you would have the best lottery odds. 8 seed would be second best. And then like first loser, second loser, so on. would have the best odds going that way. So still the same thing. I reduced this to only the top 3 teams. The top 3 picks are lottery picks, kind of under the old formula. So it's not as drastic for the worst team. So the worst record is going to pick 4th. 98 times out of 100. But that is slightly better than fifth. So it's not as much of a punishment for being bad, because you do want to still give the bad teams a chance of getting out of the cellar. And you more so want to punish the middle of the lottery. And I think that this accomplishes that, because if you're bad, you're still picking in the top four, which is the case it currently is. You have a better chance of actually being in the top four than under the current model if you're the worst team. Same if you think through like 2, 3, 4. You're going to be a pick better on average than you are under the current model, but you just have less of a chance of picking first, second, third. But I think this model would incentivize winning across the board. The top 6 in each conference would be kind of your title contenders. They're not playing for lottery odds. Then everyone else, is probably better playing off for lottery odds, even if you are like the 8 seed in the playoffs. But winning actually gets you the better odds under this model. So I think that is the best path forward. The NBA hasn't really discussed this model, so I don't think it's going to actually happen. But I do think it is something that should be considered, because I think just reversing the odds solves almost all the tanking issues. All right, that covers everything, guys. Have a great one. Bye.